LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today is Friday, 2nd of July. The weather outside is hot. It's really hot. I think 37 degrees where I am today, and sunny. And today I want to talk about a very hot as well subject. I want to talk about employee or work burnout. What is, you hear the term very often lately, but what exactly is work burnout? I would define that. I would say that job, or work burnout is a kind of special type of work-related stress. Yeah, you could say that is a state of physical or emotional tiredness or exhaustion that also involve, a sense of reduced accomplishment and maybe a loss of personal identity. Burnout is not a medical diagnosis. And some experts think that other conditions such as depression are behind burnout. But burnout, it is about your workplace. It is not about your people. And I will explain. We often think of burnout as an individual problem. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm not motivated, I don't have energy to do my things, I don't find meaning in my work, and so on. And all these ideas, all these feelings, all these emotions, normally people say, solvable by learning to say no, more yoga, better breathing exercises, practicing resilience, learning to say no, blah, blah, blah. But this is not the solution. And what I just described is just band-aid solutions to an epic and rapidly evolving workplace phenomena, that is happening. So I've done some research, and the term burnout originated long time ago. The term burnout actually originated in the 70s. And for about 40 to 50 years, the medical community has argued about how to define it. And actually in May, a couple of months ago, the WHO, an organization that has received a lot of criticism related due to COVID, the World Health Organization, WHO, included burnout in its international classification of diseases. And immediately the public, people like me and you, assumed that burnout would now be a medical condition, but it's not a medical condition, and I will explain. Burnout, it is not an individual problem. Burnout is a company problem, is a leadership challenge. And let me explain what I mean. According to a survey that was done from Gallup a couple of years ago, the top five reasons for employee burnout are, I make notes, unreasonable time pressure, lack of communication and support from manager. By the way, in this survey, there were 7,500 full-time employees asked what are the reasons for burnout. So unreasonable time pressure, lack of communication and support from the manager, lack of clarity, unmanageable workload, and top, unfair treatment at work. So this list, the top 5 reasons for employee burnout, demonstrate that the root causes of burnout do not really lie with the individual, therefore can be averted. It's the same thing like if you want to develop a flower. When you plant a flower in a pot and the flower doesn't grow, you do not go to fix the flower. You go to fix the soil. You take it out, you put new soil in, maybe you take some worms that are eating the flower, you water it, you put it under the sun. So if you want to improve employee burnout, you need to ask yourself as a leader, if you notice, if you spot, if you identify that one of your employees from Sarantinos are feeling burnout, ask yourself why. What is your workplace culture? What are your KPIs? What is your organizational behavior? How are you managing people? How are you engaging people? How are you listening to people? How are you doing your one-on-one performance reviews? How often are you having, team meetings? What kind of culture is it in your company? So ask yourself as a leader, if you're a manager and a leader, ask yourself as a leader, what is making your staff so unhealthy? Why does your work environment lack the conditions for them to flourish? How can you make safe for them to work at your company every day? Especially if you have people working in sales or in marketing, what do you do? And for me, especially when you're managing sales or marketing people, do your salespeople, do your marketing people have mentors, have coaches? Because especially in sales can be an emotionally draining job. So it is important for each person on your team to have a mentor. And, in this video today, I want to talk a little bit about the strategic theory of burnout and what you can do, not just the bullshit of breathe better, take breaks, switch off your email after 7 o'clock, and, practice yoga and learning to say no. These are not the causes of burnout. These are, as I said, band-aid, fast solutions which do not really fix the problem. So number one, ask yourself, do your employees have mentors, especially in sales? Because mentorship and coaching is also important for what? It's important for, personal and professional development. If you have salespeople, how many calls are they making per day? How many clients are they communicating with per day? 40, 50 clients? A call didn't go well. What you can do as a mentor, you can listen to the tape and offer objective advice. Your sales representative, they feel that they cannot maintain the necessary pace at their job. A mentor can coach them on how to become more efficient with their time, or how to appropriately frame this challenge to their boss. Checking in with your salespeople on a routine basis to make sure they are regularly connecting with their mentors. Another reason why people get burnout at work is they don't have the right tools. Especially if you are in sales, every minute counts. So if you as a leader, as a manager, you should increase efficiency so your salespeople can feel that they have the support and the tools and the necessary tools to perform. Because if your team don't have the right tools to do their jobs or streamline their non-selling tasks, it can be an early indicator, I'm telling you from experience, that burnout is inevitable. So do your people have the right tools? Ask yourself, I don't know. Another reason that creates burnout, or as I said, is your culture. So what are the signs? The signs are that they don't know how to measure success. As I said, one of the reasons before, when it was the survey by Gallup, it said that they don't have clear job scope. It was, I think, number 3, lack of clarity, lack of role clarity. And if you're managing salespeople, for most salespeople, the primary measure of success is what? Is business bringing in. Is monthly or quarterly quota. But if your salespeople don't have smaller goals to hit or metrics of success to celebrate within that time frame, it can be easy for them to feel burnout. Therefore, if you have the right tools in place to automate and measure KPIs throughout, throughout the sales process, throughout the sales funnel, and then at the same time educate your people on how to hit, monitor, and celebrate them. What's another sign of burnout? One sign of burnout is people have stopped caring about professional development. They walk into the office like this, or they just attend your Zoom meetings just for the sake of attending them. And professional development is something that is often overlooked from employees. And again, especially if you're in sales and marketing that are such as, very fast-paced careers, it can be easily for sales and marketing people to zone out any information that is not immediately helping them, close a deal. So if your people are so focused on making the numbers that they stop learning new sales techniques, new sales technology, they may be burnout or fast approaching it. Selling now is not like 2 years ago. Let's go to the pub with the client to drink and we'll close the deal. It's a totally new game. You need soft skills. You need emotional intelligence. You need to engage people online. And especially if you're in an overcrowded market. How are you going to differentiate yourself? So, if you're a leader, you should really invest in your team's long-term success and happiness. Because what will you achieve? Their minds will be active, engaged, and productive. Obviously, all of which help combat burnout. Another sign of employee burnout is the lack of motivation. Have you noticed some of your employees, sometimes their lunch is getting a little longer than usual? Or sometimes when they lose a client, they become, less of disappointment for them. Like, yeah, okay, I lost the client, I don't really care. Okay, that's a sign of employee burnout. Take a look at their past and recent numbers and performance reviews to determine whether this is a trend or this is something that is not very regular, an irregularity, for example. So if you notice that it's a trend, what you could do? You may have an employee who cannot perform at the level you require. If it's a trend. If it's And if it's not something not regular, something not often, something not common in this, specific person historical data, pull them aside and ask them about it. Say, hey, John, I've noticed this and this and this. How are you? What is going on with your life? How are you coping? Maybe then you can encourage them to take a few days off to recharge. And tell them, I don't expect you to answer any emails. I don't expect you to answer your phone. If they want, take a couple of days off, Thursday, Friday, including 4 days off to recharge. Or maybe you can put together a performance plan, or maybe you will, maybe even sometimes you're willing to discuss parting ways, Maybe give sometimes your salespeople some time to think it over. Maybe sometimes, when you give time people off, it is their opportunity. It can be the jolt that they need to refresh themselves and find their enthusiasm again for the job. And if this is not the case, it might be best for both of you to part ways and explore new options. What's another sign of burnout? Increased negativity. Have you noticed sometimes how come your employees become increasingly negative? And this one can be a tough one to spot, because negativity is different than sarcasm. To be negative is different than to be sarcastic, right? Because when an employee becomes a source of prolonged negativity, it can be a sign of burnout that needs to be mitigated before it spreads. Sometimes you can be so burned out that you're so negative. And what you can do? You can sit down with your people to talk. A workplace survey can be a great way to look for anonymous feedback that everyone feels comfortable sharing. Ask about goals, workplace culture, and overall, job satisfaction. And you may be surprised how many others on your team are also feeling the same, are also feeling negative, but without openly, they don't share it openly. Then you take that feedback, you have one-on-ones, you have the survey, and then make changes accordingly to address the problems openly, and then redesign your culture. And what is the outcome? Better and healthier work environment. Another sign of burnout is people are not willing to change. Sometimes when you are in sales, sometimes there is no point in reinventing the wheel if a process is working. It is also important for your salespeople, for your marketing people, for your people in general, for your team to be dynamic, changing the customer and industry trends. And evolution, innovation on your team, it is also a great way to fight burnout. But if you have an employee who refuses to use a new tool that promises to save the team time or money, this could be a sign of burnout. They're refusing, they are tired, they are negative, they are frustrated, and so on. And when you have, an employee that is kind of wrestling with burnout, they are fighting, even the smallest change to their current process can seem overwhelming. Offer training, monitor adaptation, make the change a requirement. reward changes in behavior. Change is never easy. So make sure you are acknowledging and rewarding positive steps toward the acceptance of new tools or processes that your team makes. Because again, I hear burnout and I hear all these bullshit things, all this bullshit, managers and say, take better breathing exercises and switch off your phone or your email at 7 o'clock and don't check your emails on weekends and learn to say no and take yoga. This is bullshit. I get really frustrated when I hear leaders and managers giving this kind of advice. Look inside your company. Look inside your organization. Ask yourself, what is making my staff so unhealthy? Why is my work environment, why my work environment lack the conditions for them to develop, to flourish? How can I make it safe for them to come here to work every day, happy and excited? So in general, what you should do as a leader, you need to better understand what causes your people to feel motivated or unmotivated in your organization, and what causes them frustration. What makes people feel motivated to your company? What makes people feel unmotivated to come to work in your company? There is a guy called, I think, Frederick Herzberg, and he's known for his dual factor motivation hygiene theory. So it basically says what motivates us versus what basic needs must be met in order to maintain job satisfaction. And Herzberg, in his research, found that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are not a continuum with one increasing as the other diminishes. They don't go like this, but they are independent of each other. So what that means, if you think about it, means that managers and leaders need to recognize and attend to both equally. So what makes your people motivated to come to work? What frustrates people? And what are some motivating factors? Put in the comments below. What are some motivation factors? For me, it's challenging work, recognizing individual and team achievement, responsibility, maybe the opportunity to do something meaningful, involvement in decision making, a sense of importance to the organization. Salary, work conditions, companies' policies, different. These are the hygiene factors. Often employees, you will notice that they do not recognize when a company has good hygiene, but bad hygiene can cause a major distraction and frustration. People feel it. Burnout happens when the presupposed features in our day-to-day work lives are missing or taken away. It's very simple. It's like one day you go to the break room, you find coffee, the next day there is no more coffee. Yeah, they didn't buy coffee. The administration is useless. Don't have money. The company is struggling. This is what people think. What do you think people think? So Ask better questions. This is what good leaders do. Ask better questions. So when you decide to invest in burnout prevention strategies, it is best to narrow the efforts down to small micro pilots, which mean a lower budget and less risk. Start with 1 or 2 departments or teams and ask one simple question. One simple question. You want to know that question? It's very simple. If we had this much budget and we could spend it on X items in our department, what will be the first priority? If we had a budget, this much, and we need to spend it on items or on our department, on something in our department, what would be the first priority? And you will be surprised. They will give you simple answers: better air condition, better coffee, better chairs, better CRM. And then ask this question and have the team vote anonymously and then share the data with everyone. Anonymously, without putting names. And you will realize that employees will not have the perfect, a silver bullet solution. But they can tell you certainly what is not working. And that is often, the most, And we live in VUCA times. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Organizations have a chance right now, companies have a chance right now to fix this thing. Burnout is preventable. It requires good organizational hygiene, better data, asking more timely and relevant questions, and making sure that wellness offerings are are included as part of, your well-being strategy. Keep the yoga, keep the resilience training, keep the mindful classes, keep the bin bags in the office, keep the ping pong table. That's fine. They are all terrific tools for optimizing mental health and managing stress. But when it comes to employee burnout, remember, it is on you, the leader, not on them. When managing employee burnout, the responsibility is on you, the leader, not the people. Burnout, it is not an individual problem. It is not a disease. Burnout is about your workplace. It's about your culture. It's about how transparent your company is. And although, the World Health Organization is now working on guidelines to help organizations with prevention strategies, most companies have no idea what to do about burnout. And if you have an organization or a company or a department and you want to more about burnout and what to do, contact me personally. It is an interesting time to be a leader and a manager nowadays, because it has never been, I know it's very challenging, but it has never been a better time to reboot yourself, to learn new skills, to adapt, to become a better manager and a better leader. But I think we are attacking the problem from the wrong angle. We think it's a people problem. It's not a people problem. It's a company problem. But what is companies? Companies is people as well, leaders. So it's a leadership problem, right? We go back to the same thing. So it is not a question of what is wrong with people. It is a question of what is wrong with companies. So what you can do, you can create structure for new team members. You can encourage, maybe open conversations about burnout. You can do different things. And the best thing you can do is what? The best thing you can do is to lead by example. Your team will model your behavior as a leader, good and bad. Therefore, if you practice habits that lead to burnout, your team, guess what? Your people will not feel comfortable taking the steps needed to take care of themselves when burnout is on the horizon. Because you're saying one thing, you're doing the other. Make it okay to take time off. Work with your team to understand why they do the job they do. And burnout is a natural part for any job or career path. But as a manager, as a leader, it's part of your job, it's your responsibility to be on notice, to be alert when burnout is a threat to your team, when burnout is a threat to your company, your department, your organization, and at the end of the day, the overall growth of your company, because burnout really affects bottom line. And sometimes you cannot totally eliminate it, but the best thing you can do is to prevent it, or to minimize it. Because what you want a healthy work environment, you want happy people, and you want a steadily increased revenue. Unclear job expectations is a big one. And do your people have, are they unclear about the degree of authority they have, or what they expect from you, or what you expect from them? Another thing is dysfunctional workplace dynamics. In other words, toxic work culture. And I am joining now by Vlasios Sarantinos, which I think he needs to turn his camera on. We will try again. I think we can hear him, but we cannot see him.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi there. I'm really, really sorry. I had a bit of a medical emergency.
No worries. We are live, by the way, but we cannot see you.
I'm trying to turn my camera shows it's on. I'm not sure.
Maybe you can on your LinkedIn as well. No worries. he will come back. So yeah, as I said, dysfunctional workplace dynamics. In other words, a toxic work culture. Perhaps you work with in your office that you have a lot of office bullies, or your people feel undermined by colleagues, or maybe they have their direct leader, their direct supervisor micromanages their work. And guess what? This can contribute to job stress. Another thing that can happen is, when a job is too monotonous or chaotic, chaotic has happened for the last 2 months. When you need constant energy to remain focused, which then can lead to fatigue and job burnout. Another thing, as I can imagine, is a lack of social support, especially if you're working from home and you feel isolated at work, and you also feel isolated in your personal life. You might feel more stressed. Work-life imbalance. If your work takes up so much time of your time and effort that you don't really have the energy to spend time with your family and friends, you might burn out quickly as well. And the consequences are big. For people, it can be stress, fatigue, insomnia. But then again, it is the leader's responsibility to fix that, because it is not a people problem. We cannot say we're going to get rid of that person, okay, because they don't fit the culture of the company. What do you mean? The culture is determined by you. We'll wait for another couple of minutes for Vlasios to join us and see how. What do you guys think about burnout? You can share. Because it's a real problem. It is a real problem. Yeah, so here is Vlasios. How are you?
Hi there. At long last, thank you for your patience once again. Just managing. Thank you. So once again, really happy to be here, and apologies for the delay due to an unexpected emergency.
No worries, no worries.
Partially due, I suspect, to the topic as well, burnout.
Well, I'm trying to just give me a moment, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
This one I want to take away. This one. So now I'm talking. Yeah, maybe first of all, Vlasios Sarantinos, who is a senior lecturer of the University of UWE in Bristol. How is the weather in Bristol this morning, by the way? Is it sunny or is it gloomy and dull?
Surprisingly, it has taken a turn for the better the last few days. So it's quite sunny. So we're having a spell of sunshine, and it's holding up, which is good. So it's nice and sunny and all positive for now. I'm not sure when it will become downcast and rainy.
Wow. Maybe in the next 2 minutes it will change, as you know.
Well, possible. Hopefully not, but you never know.
You know how the British barbecue is. 5 minutes under the sun here, 5 minutes under the sun there, 5 minutes under the sun later. So Vlasios, I'm talking about employee burnout and how it affects bottom line. And what I discussed, monologued really with myself today, is I don't believe that employee burnout is a people problem. I think it's a leadership problem, and this is what I mean. If you want to grow a flower in a pot, and if the flower is not growing, you don't change the flower, you change the pot. You change the soil, maybe you take out some worms that are eating the flower, you water it, and you put it under the sun. And with employee burnout is not a people problem. burnout is about workplace, it's not about people. And what I discussed is because I don't know if you know, but 2 months ago in May, the WHO, the World Health Organization, classified for the first time ever burnout as included, I would say, burnout in its international classification of diseases. It's the first time. But burnout, it's, we cannot go and say, it's the people's fault, because leaders are the ones who are creating the culture. And the bottom line is keeping the yoga in the office, keeping the bin bags, keeping the ping pong table is good. They are terrific tools for optimizing mental health and managing stress. But when it comes to employee burnout, remember, it is the responsibility of the leader to create that environment to avoid burnout. So what do you think?
I think you are, for the most part, you are correct. Definitely, it stems from the work environment, and there's a direct correlation between the culture that you have in the workplace and burnout. So to begin with, I'm starting this from the lenses that we have in the West, or perhaps in some societies in Asia, perhaps that's more work-centric. People by default work more hours. But look at it from a more European or Westernized perspective, where historically we've got a 9 till 6 work pattern and more entrenched concept of work-life balance. I think burnout is a modern ailment that plagues both individuals and workplaces. So, and despite the fact that organizations have specific policies in place to prevent that, and they often do not intend to drag people into the vortex of working non-stop or working 24/7, it still very much happens, or it becomes the norm. So due to the very competitive nature of organizations, due to the very competitive nature of the marketplaces, so it almost becomes a requirement, implicit, that you will need to be at your work, working for as long as it needs to be for you to deliver, and that is immaterial of other circumstances. So often that might not be rubber stamped, but I think it has become acceptable, if not required, by work environment. So indirectly, I think over the last 10, 20 years, it has crept in, and it has become quite a big part of our lives. So no one will tell you that you need to clock 60 hours a week, but if you work in an industry such as finance, I think that and more hours, it's not uncommon. But at the same time, it is directly related to your ability to be successful and your ability to retain your job and performance, and the company to remain sustainable, that everyone will put in the extra effort, will go the extra mile. The trouble is that that is becoming more and more the norm rather than the outlier. So whilst in the past probably you had to work overtime, 1 or 2 days a month, now that's becoming a week or even further. And you're right, leaders tend to accept that. I mean, often they will recognize and they will acknowledge contribution, but I think there is a drive to start considering it as normal. I know that there are discussions happening around how can we prevent that? Because you quite rightly said that the mental health and the consequences of overworking and burnout can be tremendous, and it is simply not possible to keep on working at a pace of 60 hours a week or more for months on end, and that will backfire. Effectively, you are burning your own fuel, your own ability, your own concentration, your own physical and mental resources, meaning that although you might be putting in the hours, in the end, you will not be productive. And that is another vital thing. We should not really be considering the fact that we are putting in 100 hours a week as the same as being productive for the same amount of hours. I think people often neglect the fact that after a certain threshold, their performance starts to dwindle, and it can become counterproductive. So you can simply have someone there, but someone operating at a subpar level, at 20 or 30% of their actual ability as they would normally be able to function. So, but that is difficult to also evaluate. Often we just need the people, we need the critical mass, we need people to work long hours, and we need the people to be there and do the work. And it's not often visible if they're not operating at the required level. And we can only see that post project. So the long-winded background links to what you said. Yes, definitely. The environment can cultivate or accept this norm of working long hours, putting in all that extra labor, and making it into something that people feel obliged they need to stick by. And while I think we all have to work longer and have to pull in our efforts to ensure that deadlines are met, I think that in the long term will backfire, because we should not neglect also the employer brand, and the fact that people will provide feedback and it will create the reputation of organizations. And if companies are becoming known for their very, very stressful and the very, very pressurized work environment, that will detract people from applying, diverting talent to other firms. That's without considering the actual ability for firms to remain competitive if they are if the situation that they are finding themselves into is overworking their staff. I'm careful to differentiate between the situation and the environment and directly the individual leaders, because I don't, in good conscience, believe that leaders will deliberately ask people to overwork and will not deal with burnout. And
hopefully not. Yes.
Which leads me to the other part: is how do you perceive, identify, and manage burnout before it becomes a complete collapse? Because I think there are visible signs. The strain.
I have exactly. I have discussed this before. Exactly, there are signs. Yes, there are absolutely signs. Being negative, just to being negative. Sometimes they stop caring about their professional development. They lack motivation. They are unwilling to change. All those are signs.
100%. And
even sometimes taking longer lunch than used to.
That could be the early on signs. When someone is just beginning to feel the weight on their shoulders, and they are starting to feel the pressure, and they are just able to merely keep on, just clocking in the hours, working on this. And I think there are phases. It depends on the people there, of course, and the organization and many other different factors, but I think after a certain threshold, which I call tolerance threshold, when they'll start to overdo it, it will start to catch up, and people won't often realize, I'm just tired, and therefore I'm not productive. I'm not thinking straight. I cannot really think at the same speed. I can't multitask. I can't analyze. So I can still be in front of my computer, and I can still try to do the same thing. It would normally take half an hour, and be staring in front of the computer screen for 3 hours, because I was meant to finish this at 9 p.m. and it's 5 a.m. and I'm still looking
Yeah.
at it. And but the key thing is then for the line manager and the de facto leader who is interfacing with that staff is to actually diagnose when it's hanging on the balance, and when you can see that people are going beyond what is healthy, to put it simply.
What you said now on the diagnosis from the leader, there was I mentioned this before. There was a survey by Gallup of around 7,500 full-time employees, and the top 5 reasons for burnout, starting from 5th to 1st, is unreasonable time pressure, lack of communication and support from their manager, lack of role clarity, unmanageable workload, and number 1, unfair treatment at work. So maybe the line manager here, being a middle manager, not being the senior leader, is a tough job, because you are in between the senior leadership and the bottom line, and sometimes you don't make decisions. You don't make a lot of decisions. You are trying to please both parties, and sometimes you're ending up getting burnout yourself.
Yeah.
So that communication, that link, that gap.
It's true, when you're stuck in the middle, as they say, or when you are having more operational than strategic oversight, your actual decision making can be quite limited. But at the same time, you are the de facto leader for the people that are working with you, so your team. So you are there, to put it in inverted commas, their boss. Line managers are frontline. They are the ones that actually will interface and will witness what is happening down at the ground level, and they are the ones that will actually diagnose firsthand what's happening, and if they are seeing individual employees or generally people within a department are suffering from burnout and there's excessive workload. So yes, they might not be in a position to make wider decisions that will affect workload within the company, but at the local level, they can definitely see what's happening and potentially try to mitigate, perhaps give some time off, request for more resource, or try to support individual workers through periods of excessive workload. So there are specific decisions within that level that line managers can take. But at the same time, I think it's their responsibility to communicate with the more senior leaders, what is happening, and explain the consequences. So, I think one of the key reasons for not addressing burnout is precisely the fact that people either discount that as an actual problem, or the fact that you said that also line managers themselves are working excessively and are subjected themselves into the burnout phenomenon. So I think it is required to recognize the impact and flagged that up as a organizational wide issue with very, very significant negative ramifications in terms of performance, in terms of morale, in terms of motivation, in terms of ability and capability, that it can potentially create more adverse effects than the short-lived benefits it can produce. Because you said it,
Yeah.
it all links back to the culture. If that is either acceptable or tolerated, or in fact it's anticipated implicitly that people will put in long hours, then that will create negative consequences in the long run. So I think that's a very, very important thing to bear in mind. So either to be aware of it or simply not doing anything about it. And senior management will need to take stock of such a phenomenon, and they should be looking at transforming the culture both in theory and in practice, because there's no point, for instance, giving long holidays or giving additional perks such as counseling, such as gym membership, such as
Those are band-aid solutions.
yes, correct. So they might exist, but they
Yeah.
wouldn't really address the root cause of the problem. What it will take is a brave decision by an organization, by the senior leaders, to actually look at what is happening, identify how did they end up in a position where burnout became the norm, or became part and parcel of what the organization or the department was doing, and
Yeah.
start addressing it. That will require potential investment, that will require putting in extra resource in terms of staff and time and infrastructure to address it. But again, it's short-term upfront investment versus longer-term benefit, because I've seen where organizations actually addressed burnout and looked at what was causing it and communicated with staff. And you were right, communication is key. Okay, how did we end up like this? Why did we move from a normal organization that expected people to take the holiday into a situation where people felt obliged not to take the holiday and simply be there and keep on clocking in the hours? So, and transform that organizational DNA by engaging staff and ensuring that the transition from where people had to work excessively into a more fairer workload and fair way of doing things will be the ultimate outcome. It's not a straightforward process.
No, yeah. I don't want. Yeah, it's a lot like one of my coaching solutions I have. It's how to engage employees, and all burnout is all included. Normally, I would say, with my experience when I work with leaders, it is a 9 to 12 months process. It is long because it includes surveys, leadership dashboards, finding out the why. So it's not easy. And yeah.
Yeah, it's by no stretch of the imagination is easy. As you say, can take 9 to 12 months, sometimes even longer, depending on the size and the actual root cause of the problem. And I think it has to do with the mentality, is that if people have been entrenched in that mentality for a very, very, very long while, then it will take significant amount of time to convince them otherwise. So if a company has been pushing people to work for long and has been pushing them to the limit, now to claw back on that and ensure that that is not happening and it is addressed and people will be allowed the space and time to recover, it will require some convincing. It cannot really happen overnight. And, as with any change initiative, it requires the senior leaders to be champions and to be promoting and actively engaging staff at all levels in doing that.
Yeah, they need to be the role model as well.
Exactly, precisely. I guess another important element to what we're discussing now is potentially culture, because as you know, having been in Asia, in some countries, longer work hours is more normal than perhaps in the West. So in countries like Japan, for instance, that commitment,
Absolutely, yes.
that focuses the whole at a national level, the norm. But I think there we're talking about a different situation, where I think we're
Yeah,
looking at the burnout in the more conventional terms within the Western paradigm,
yeah.
which is a modern element. And if I may add,
Japan is a little bit different. Like you'll go to Japan, you work 8 hours, and they will call you a part timer, just to put a bit of a joke.
yeah, no, but I think it's different. It's everyone is subscribing, and it's their belief, and that's what's happening
Yeah,
across the board. So
yeah,
um,
yeah.
another important aspect, which it might be interesting to bring up, is with COVID, the situation around workload, remote working, and burnout. And I'm not sure how much you have experienced it, but what I'm seeing and hearing from people is that when traditional office workers had to move to working from home, suddenly they had massive flexibility, but for some, the line between work and private life became blurred. And since they were in front of the computer screen, they would end up spending far longer and working far more than in the past, simply because the concept of I'm in the office, I'm working, after I'm done, I'll switch off, go back home, and I will resume work when I return to the office the following day. Now, when you are constantly in front of a computer screen and you are effectively in that virtual space, work can be ongoing. So I think what we might be seeing, and I think that will become visible a little bit further down the line, is burnout in the face of virtual working, which can potentially be dependent on the inability of both individuals to distinguish between their private life and work, and potentially firms who are now caught unaware of how to regulate workloads online to address that, if that makes sense. So I think we are now seeing that phenomenon in the more contemporary workspace, and the consequences of virtual working. If you do not know how to manage your own time and put your foot down and say, I will stop working now, or more importantly, if your organization and your leaders don't know how to have some ground rules about how much you should be working, what hours you are required to be online and to be connected. So I think we discussed it last time about, for example, answering to emails and having specific hours within a day and a week that you will be contactable and you'll be answering emails. And
Yeah,
Monday to Friday from 8:30 till 6:30, for instance, and you won't really be picking up any emails until next week over the weekend, for instance. So
yeah,
uh, I think that's another interesting dimension in terms of burnout and how that has actually carried on. So the fact that we have more flexibility did not necessarily prevent burnout. It just, in some cases, might have created more cause to consider addressing burnout, because it is now becoming potentially more invisible. I think in our previous discussion, we talked about how you can manage remote teams and conflict and some of the issues. And we talked about, how do you communicate? How do you
yeah,
maintain that connection when you're not in the same physical space? And burnout can be something it will become more difficult to observe if you are working remotely, and might pose a challenge for managers as well.
Yeah, so, sometimes it can also be not only work burnout, company burnout. It can also be sometimes some people face industry burnout.
Yeah.
They work in an industry for so many years. They are tired. They say, I want to change industry, like sales or financial, or I guess any industry. It can happen as well, which is on a bigger scale, because they need to reskill. Maybe they need to learn something new to work in a new industry and start fresh.
Yep. I mean, you are quite right. Many people have chosen to drop very lucrative positions and very lucrative careers in specific sectors that are simply very, very demanding. And to put it very, very bluntly, simplify, cut back. And
Yeah.
they reached a point in their lives and their careers where they said, I have a family, I have to decide what matters to me. Is it my work, or is it my health, my well-being, and that of my family as an extension? And you're losing really good staff that way. Uh,
Yeah.
and you know, looking at turnover in some industries, some turnover might be expected, but we are looking at people with very, very strong skills and very, very specific talents simply dropping the work because it's not sustainable. So I think it goes back to our earlier point about weighing the costs of accepting burnout and believing that the consequences of pushing people out are acceptable, versus retaining staff and ensuring that they are there to support you in the long term in a very sustainable fashion, will put in the same scale. And yeah, literally, we need to be conscious that humans are humans and they have their limits. And if they are pushed beyond those limits for a prolonged period of time, they will break down and they will collapse.
Yeah.
It might be a gradual process. It might take days, weeks, or months, but eventually there will be a time when that will come back to haunt you. So I think being proactive and recognizing the problem that there is a situation where people are stressed, are overworked, and what is creating that, and addressing it from the beginning is very essential. Um, and that is another situation is, and I have seen it, I'm not sure about your own experience, is that often people are reluctant to talk about it, because especially if generally it's the norm to work long hours, people will be skeptical or afraid of losing face. That is what happening. If
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
voice my concern, I might be seen as weak, and I would, then that would be frowned upon. And how about my career prospecting? You see quite younger employees and professionals that want to establish themselves and build their career, and say, you know what, I can do this. It's embarrassing to talk about it. I often say and advise against it. There is no harm in admitting that you are tired. There's no harm in actually talking openly about feeling stressed. There is no harm whatsoever in recognizing that you are reaching a pivotal point in terms of your ability to work, and that you need to break. And that is something that needs to be recognized by both employees and line managers. That communication, of course, it relates with how able the leaders are to elicit that and have that good relationship with their staff, so that the staff will be able to voice any such concerns, and the culture of the organization to enable that two-way street in terms of discussion to actually take place. So it's not easy. It's definitely something that requires investment and focus, but I think it can potentially bring significant benefits as well. Addressing burnout at the beginning and avoiding the longer term impact that might create can go a long way in terms of ensuring that you've got a far happier and far more content workforce.
Yeah, I guess from company's point of view, to talk about mental health, to talk about mental health to the general group and not to specific people, it is a good strategy. It is a good tip. But yeah, it's a long process. It is not easy. It requires both short and long-term goals, and some companies, like for example the airline industry, sometimes they don't have any choice. I'll give you an example before we wrap up. Before we wrap up, another couple of minutes, I'll say then your final thoughts. But the airline industry, I know pilots that fly from UK to India because they have to, and then they swap crew, and then the pilots that flew out the first leg, they stay on the airplane and they go back because they cannot enter India because of the high COVID cases. So they are like 30 hours in a plane. I understand on their way back they don't work, and when they come home they take a couple of days off. But can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps that's one of the most indicative lines of work where they have to, because simply the operational cycle is such. But I think, and you might be able to tell a little bit more about it, that they do put in very long hours for that short spell of a few days, but then in the month they get other days off to compensate.
Yeah, they do.
For that. So I guess that is a good example of a potential viable model that companies can have, that okay, if it is required by that specific group of employees to work longer simply because there's no replacement, or it's simply the nature of what they do, to build in the space to enable recovery. It's one thing having people working long hours all the time, all through the week, month, and year, and it's a different thing concentrating that in specific points of time, but enabling them and providing the sufficient space to recover. So absolutely, it can happen. And for all, I don't think there has been any employee who hasn't worked overtime or hasn't been through that process where they had to go above and beyond in what they do. But it's recognition, it's rewarding, and it is enabling or creating the space to enable that recovery for employees. That will make a massive difference between an organization that shows little interest, but an organization that actually identifies and acknowledges such phenomena and tries to mitigate against them in a way that it actually can have material impact on what people do.
So just to wrap up, my final thought is, I guess one of the most important things with burnout is the early stage. And I'm talking from a manager point of view, from a leader point of view, is to identify, to spot it, to identify it as soon as possible, and then find the source. And then comes the strategy, then comes the other things. Because I suppose prevention and early, when you identify it early, is better than later. So we have to wrap up. The final thoughts for a minute or so.
Thank you. Just following on from what you just said, absolutely. So the ability to identify it and early on and proactively trying to understand what is causing it, where is the root cause of any such overworking and burnout, and try to address it or provide the resources to people to manage that in an actual way, not just, as you said, just trying to pretend that they're actually doing something, but engaging with staff, communicating and providing material solutions to address it is vital. But again, it boils down to the ability of the leaders at senior and perhaps middle level to identify what is causing it and coming up with really relevant solutions to address that at source. So rather than put a band-aid, as we discussed, trying to work out how can we engage staff to provide them with the opportunity to either avoid burnout or support them to overcome such a situation if that is part of what they're doing. So having relevant strategy, having appropriate policies in place, and enabling people to actually use them is essential. So not have a well-being practice and in name only, but something that people can actually avail themselves of and use and ensure that it is making a difference, it is delivering against that. I think it's crucial. So number one, being in a position to identify if you've got such phenomena, work out what is creating it, and then work with your employees to try and find the best balance in terms of addressing without potentially disrupting your work at the same time as well. So that's essential, and that can have significant long-term benefits for companies and employees as well.
Lovely. Vlasios, thank you very much. Vlasios Sarantinos from the University of West of England. I wish you a lovely weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And see you again.
See you. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.